Something just shifted in the Middle East, and almost no one in Washington wants to say out loud what it really means. Within the last few hours, the American ambassador to Israel walked up to a microphone and confirmed a sentence that even 5 years ago would have been considered fiction. Israel has moved Iron Dome batteries onto the soil of the United Arab Emirates. Not parts, not blueprints, not a quiet technology transfer buried inside a defense memo, actual batteries, actual launchers, actual Israeli personnel in Israeli uniforms, standing on Arabian sand, fingers near triggers, eyes on Iranian skies. Read that again. Because the world you grew up in is not the world that exists tonight. For more than 70 years, the official story of the Gulf was simple. Arab states hated Israel. Israel did not trust Arab states. Iran sat in the middle, playing both sides, daring anyone to make a move. That entire architecture, the one every president from Nixon to Obama tiptoed around, is now collapsing in real time. And it is collapsing on live television in the middle of an active war. The United States Ambassador Mike Huckabee did not whisper this from a back room. He announced it publicly, proudly. He framed it as a sign of how far the Israel-UAE relationship has come under the pressure of the Iran war. But strip away the diplomatic varnish, and you can hear what is really being said. The old Middle East is dead. A new one is being built right now, under fire, in the dark, while most Americans are scrolling past the headline on their way to the next celebrity scandal. And here's the part nobody's ready to admit. If Israeli interceptors are now defending Abu Dhabi, then an attack on Abu Dhabi is, by every reasonable definition, an attack on Israel. And an attack on Israel, under current doctrine, is treated by Washington as an attack on a core American interest. So follow the chain. A single missile fired from a basement in Yemen or a drone flying out of a militia compound in Iraq can now drag 3 governments, 4 militaries, and 1 global oil market into a war that begins before the morning news cycle even starts. This is not posturing. This is positioning. This is what countries do when they believe a much larger strike is coming and they do not have time to argue about feelings or history. So sit with that for a moment. Israeli soldiers in the Gulf hunting Iranian missiles with American blessing in the middle of an open war. That is the opening sentence of a new chapter. And the rest of the chapter is already being written, whether the public is paying attention or not. Let's walk through exactly what happened because the speed of it is part of the story. It is Tuesday. The Iran war is no longer a rumor, no longer a forecast, no longer a hypothetical floated on cable news. It is happening. Strikes are flying. Air defenses are firing. Insurance markets in London are pricing tanker hulls like they are about to be set on fire. And into that environment, the American ambassador to Israel steps forward and confirms that Israeli Iron Dome batteries, along with the Israeli crews trained to run them, have been physically deployed inside the United Arab Emirates. Not loaned, not promised, deployed. The Iron Dome is not a symbol. It is a working system. It is the same system that has been catching short-range rockets over Israeli cities for more than a decade. It is the system that in the public imagination is the wall between an Israeli family in Tel Aviv and a warhead from Gaza or Lebanon. That wall has now been extended hundreds of miles southeast, across the Persian Gulf to protect skyscrapers in Abu Dhabi and oil terminals along the Emirati coast. Think about the players in that single sentence. Israel, a country that until 2020 had no formal diplomatic relations with the UAE. A country whose flag was banned from being flown in most Gulf capitals within living memory. The United Arab Emirates, a federation of sheikdoms that just 1 generation ago would have officially called Israel an enemy state. A country that hosts massive American air assets, deep Chinese investment, and quiet but real Russian business ties. Iran, a regional power that has spent 40 years building a network of militias, proxies, and missile programs designed for exactly this scenario. Tehran has long warned that any normalization between Arab states and Israel would be treated as an act of hostility. Now, those warnings are being tested in real time, and the United States, the country whose ambassador just confirmed the whole arrangement on the record without flinching. This is a power struggle in its rawest form. Iran built its strategy on the idea that the Arab world would never truly stand with Israel. The UAE just blew that idea apart. Israel built its strategy on the idea that sooner or later Sunni Gulf monarchies would care more about Iranian missiles than Palestinian flags. Tonight, that bet is paying off in the most visible way possible. But there is a darker reading, and it matters. Iron Dome batteries do not move across international borders on a whim. They move when intelligence services believe a serious attack is close. They move when planners run the numbers and decide that without extra interceptors, civilian casualties in a partner country will hit a level that cannot be politically absorbed. They move when the next 48 hours look worse than the last 48 hours. Israel is not sharing capability with the UAE because everything is fine. Israel is sharing capability because something very bad is expected to happen, and soon. That is the part the press release will never say out loud, but it is sitting underneath every word of this announcement, blinking red. To understand why this single deployment is a thunderclap, you have to walk back through the last several years, because none of this is sudden. It is the result of a slow, grinding, often invisible buildup that finally cracked the surface today. Start in 2020. The Abraham Accords are signed. The UAE, Bahrain, and later Morocco and Sudan formally recognize Israel. Across most of the world, the story is sold as a peace deal. In private capitals, it is understood as something else. It is an anti-Iran coalition wearing a peace ribbon. The shared enemy is Tehran. The shared fear is a nuclear-capable Iran with a ring of missile-armed proxies stretching from Yemen to Lebanon. The shared math is brutal. Without each other, none of these countries can fully defend their skies. With each other, they might just be able to hold the line. Now move forward. The Iranians watched the accords and did not stay quiet. Their official statements called the deal a betrayal of the Arab cause. Their unofficial actions were sharper. Drones started appearing over Abu Dhabi. Cargo ships started catching fire in the Gulf of Oman. Cyber attacks against Emirati infrastructure spiked. None of it was framed as war, but all of it was a message. You normalize with Israel and your skyline is no longer safe. Then came the Houthis, a militia in Yemen, backed and armed by Iran that turned ballistic missiles and long-range drones into a regional shock weapon. In 2022, they fired drones and missiles directly at the UAE. 3 workers were killed near Abu Dhabi. The Emiratis intercepted what they could. American Patriot batteries on Emirati soil filled the gaps. But the lesson was carved into the rock of every Gulf capital that night. The age of safe skies was over. While that was happening, Israel was fighting its own multi-front war. October 7th, 2023. Hamas attacks. Hezbollah rockets. Houthi missiles aimed at Eilat. Iranian drones launched directly from Iranian territory. For the first time in modern history, Israeli civilians had to sit in shelters waiting for incoming projectiles from 4 different countries at once. The Israeli defense industry, already advanced, was pushed into overdrive. Iron Dome stopped being a story about Tel Aviv and started becoming the most battle-tested air defense system in the world. And in the middle of all this, the quiet calls began. Emirati officials, Israeli officials, American officials, hotels in Cyprus, side rooms at conferences in Singapore, encrypted lines between defense ministries, joint training quietly hosted in countries that asked not to be named, officers swapping notes on radar tracks, engineers comparing interception patterns. The public did not see it. The Iranians absolutely did. Then came the escalation that finally turned the slow burn into an open flame. Direct Iranian strikes on Israeli territory, Israeli strikes on Iranian command sites. Tit for tat across the region, with the dial cranked higher every week. Insurance rates on Gulf shipping climbed. Saudi airspace closed and reopened and closed again. Allied embassies in the region quietly told personnel to update their evacuation plans. By the time the ambassador walked up to that microphone today, this announcement was not really news, it was a confirmation. The wall had already been built. He was just turning on the lights so the public could see it. Now picture the moment itself. A microphone, a camera, an American ambassador in a suit. Behind him, the flags. In front of him, a room full of reporters who already smell that something heavy is coming. He speaks. The sentence lands. Israel has sent Iron Dome batteries and operating personnel to the United Arab Emirates to help defend it from Iranian attacks. There is no qualifier, no maybe, no someday. He says it the way you say something that has already happened and cannot be taken back. And then he goes further. He calls it a reflection of the strengthening defense relationship between Israel and the UAE. He ties it directly to the Iran war. He does not bury it under jargon. He does not hide it behind a leak. He owns it on behalf of the United States government. In a sane decade, that one sentence would dominate every front page for a week. Let me break down what is hidden inside it. First, the deployment is real and it is operational. Iron Dome is not a museum piece you ship around for show. The batteries that left Israeli soil are equipment Israel cannot replace overnight. Israel sent them anyway. That is a choice with risk. That is a choice that says the UAE matters enough to Israel that Israel is willing to thin its own defenses to keep Emirati cities standing. Second, Israeli soldiers are on Emirati soil with weapons. This is the line that should be making policy historians stop in their tracks. For most of the modern Middle East, the deepest taboo was Israeli boots on Arab ground. Egypt's peace treaty included careful demilitarized zones. Jordan's peace treaty avoided anything that could look like Israeli military presence inside the kingdom. Today, that taboo was casually walked across by both governments at once, with the United States holding the door open. Third, the framing is everything. The ambassador did not call this an emergency. He called it a relationship. That word choice is deliberate. Emergencies end. Relationships continue. He is signaling that this is not a one-time favor. This is the start of a permanent change in how the Gulf is defended. Fourth, and this is the part most viewers will miss, this announcement was made in public and not buried. That is itself a strategic act. There are entire categories of military cooperation that countries hide for decades, things that only come out in retired generals' memoirs. The fact that this was confirmed openly in daylight in the middle of an active war means somebody in Washington and somebody in Jerusalem wanted Tehran to hear it. You can almost picture the message under the message. We are not afraid of you knowing. We want you to know. We want every Iranian commander running his next strike package to understand that the missile he aims at an Emirati target will be intercepted by an Israeli battery flying an Emirati flag of permission. We want every regional capital to understand that the lines of defense have been redrawn while they were arguing about old grievances. This was the climax. This was the turn, not a bomb, not a speech, a single confirmed sentence at a press event. But the seismograph of the Middle East just spiked, and anyone who can read it knows the ground is moving. The reactions came fast and they came in layers. Inside Iran, the immediate language was, predictably, defiant. State media framed the move as proof that the UAE has placed itself in the line of fire. Hardline commentators on Iranian airwaves told their audience that Emirati cities are now legitimate military targets because they host Israeli weapons. That language matters. Iran does not need to send a formal threat letter. State broadcasters do that job by saturating the airwaves. The signal to every proxy commander from Sana'a to Baghdad is plain. Targets in the UAE are open. Inside the UAE, the response was more measured, but you could feel the pressure underneath. Official statements emphasized self-defense, sovereignty, and the right to protect citizens. There was no triumphant celebration. The tone was that of a country that has decided to absorb a serious risk because it believes a worse risk is waiting if it does nothing. Emirati commentators on regional networks spoke of resilience, of strategic clarity, of a region that can no longer pretend Iran is a normal neighbor. Beneath the language was a quiet, hard message. We have made our choice. We will live with it. Inside Israel, the mood was something like pride layered over exhaustion. Israeli media leaned into the historical weight. Commentators noted that the same country that decades ago would have refused to even shake an Israeli hand at the United Nations was now hosting Israeli air defense crews to keep its skies clear. There was also a more sober undertone. Every battery sent abroad is a battery not protecting an Israeli town. Every Israeli soldier in Abu Dhabi is a soldier not in Sderot or Haifa. That trade-off is real, and Israeli families talking around their dinner tables tonight feel it. In Washington, the reactions split along the usual lines, but with a twist. Hawks on both sides celebrated the deployment as proof that the architecture of American partnerships is delivering. Critics on the left worried that the United States is now even more entangled in a regional war that has no clear off-ramp. Critics on the right, the more isolationist kind, asked why American partners are not handling more of this themselves and whether the United States is sliding into another forever war by proxy. Behind closed doors, defense officials privately admitted that something like this had been on the table for months. The only surprise was the openness. In Europe, capitals reacted with a mix of nervous approval and quiet concern. London and Berlin worried about oil supply lines through the Strait of Hormuz. Paris worried about the symbolic message a deepened Israel-UAE military bond sends to the wider Arab world. Brussels worried, as always, about being relevant. None of them moved decisively. They watched. In Riyadh, the reaction is the one to watch most carefully. Saudi Arabia is the giant in the room. Saudi normalization with Israel has been dangled, withdrawn, hinted at, and shelved for years. Tonight, Saudi planners have to consider a question they did not want to face yet. If the UAE can host Israeli batteries openly and survive, does Saudi Arabia have to consider the same? If it refuses, does it fall behind in the regional defense architecture? If it agrees, does it provoke its own internal storm? Markets, meanwhile, were already nervous. Oil prices spiked on early reports and continued to climb as the implications sank in. Shipping companies issued fresh advisories on the Strait of Hormuz. Defense stocks moved upward in after-hours trading. Currency desks in Asia adjusted exposure to the Gulf. A single announcement made in a single room rippled through trading screens in 5 continents within hours. The chaos is not loud. It is not riots. It is not breaking glass. It is the quiet, methodical recalculation of risk that happens when the world's most powerful institutions realize the rulebook just got a fresh chapter. So who actually gains and who actually loses when the dust settles on this announcement? Start with the clearest winner: Israel. For decades, Israeli strategists dreamed of a regional architecture where Arab states would openly stand with them against Iran. That dream is now physical. There are Israeli flags on Israeli equipment defending an Arab capital tonight. Israeli defense exports, already a national crown jewel, just got the most powerful sales demonstration in history. Iron Dome went from a system that protects Israel to a system that protects entire regions. Future buyers in Asia, Europe, and beyond are watching. The geopolitical weight of Israel just expanded far beyond its borders. Second, the UAE wins something too, even though it is taking on real danger. Abu Dhabi has now positioned itself as the most strategically essential Arab capital in the region. It is the place where Israel sends its best technology. It is the place where the United States talks first. It is the place where the new Middle East is being prototyped. Emirati leaders have made a long bet that being indispensable is safer than being neutral. Tonight, that bet looks bolder than ever. Third, the United States. On the surface, this looks like another expensive entanglement. Underneath, it is a policy victory for anyone who believes American strategy should rely on networks rather than direct boots on the ground. Every Israeli battery in the UAE is an American battery that does not have to be sent. Every Israeli operator in Abu Dhabi is an American operator who can stay home. The cost to the United States on the surface is mostly political. The benefit is structural. American allies are now defending each other directly, with American blessing in a region that has bled American treasure for decades. Now, the losers. Iran is the obvious one. Tehran's whole regional strategy assumed Arab governments could be pressured, bribed, or threatened into refusing real alliances with Israel. That strategy is now broken. Iranian planners now have to assume that any strike on the UAE will run into Israeli interceptors. They have to assume that any strike on Saudi infrastructure could trigger similar arrangements down the road. They have to assume that their 40-year project of building a ring of proxy power around Israel is being matched in real time by a ring of integrated defense around Iran itself. Less obvious losers, Russia and China. Both have spent the last decade quietly expanding influence in the Gulf, selling arms, building ports, making deals. Both have presented themselves as alternatives to American security guarantees. Tonight's announcement undercuts that pitch. When the missiles start flying, Gulf governments did not call Moscow, they did not call Beijing, they called Tel Aviv and Washington. That is a market share story as much as it is a security story. Also losing, although they will not say it publicly, are the Palestinian factions and their political backers in the region. For decades, the Palestinian cause has been used as the unifying flag of Arab politics, the issue that supposedly made normalization with Israel impossible. Tonight, an Arab government welcomed Israeli soldiers onto its soil during a war involving Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, and Yemen. The signal is brutal in its simplicity. The Palestinian cause is no longer powerful enough to stop the region from rearranging itself around Iranian threats. Long term, the deeper shift is this. The Middle East is moving from a region defined by ideology to a region defined by infrastructure, from slogans to sensors, from cassette tape revolutions to satellite-linked air defense grids. The countries that adapt to that change will become the new centers of power. The countries that cling to the old narratives will fade. This may be the beginning of something bigger than a single war. It may be the beginning of a permanent regional security pact, written first in interceptor systems, then in joint command centers, then maybe one day in a formal treaty. The blueprint is being drawn while the fires are still burning. Now zoom out, because this story is not only about a battery on Emirati sand. For America, this is a profound moment, and most Americans are missing it. The United States has been the security backbone of the Middle East for more than half a century. That role came with carriers in the Gulf, bases across the peninsula, and an ever-present threat that any regional war could pull American troops in directly. Tonight's announcement signals a possible new model. American influence projected through American partners, allies defending allies, the United States as the architect rather than the constant first responder. That model has real strengths. It saves American lives, it spreads risk, it deepens regional ownership of regional problems, but it has dangers too. When allies defend each other under your blessing, your fingerprints are still on every decision. If something goes catastrophically wrong, the world will not blame Tel Aviv or Abu Dhabi alone. It will blame Washington. The American voter who barely follows these stories will be told one morning that the country is on the brink of a much bigger war, and the chain of events that got us there will be hard to explain in a 30-second clip. For American institutions, this announcement raises hard questions that Congress is barely equipped to handle. Was there a formal authorization for this kind of deepened defense cooperation? Did the legislative branch weigh in on the deployment of Israeli forces with American backing to a third country during an active war? Or did this happen the way so many things happen now, in the executive shadows, justified by alliances and explained later? Each time the system bypasses public debate on questions of war and peace, the muscle of democratic oversight gets a little weaker. For markets, the warning is more direct. The world economy still runs on Gulf oil and Gulf shipping. Any miscalculation in the next round of strikes can spike fuel prices, hammer airlines, choke supply chains, and bleed into grocery bills in suburbs that have never heard of Hormuz. Iron Dome can intercept a missile. It cannot intercept a panic-driven oil market or a wave of inflation rolling through a country that just finished one cost of living crisis. American families are about to learn again that what happens in the Gulf does not stay in the Gulf. For the global order, this is a stress test. The post-Cold War idea was that the world would slowly become flatter, more economic, less military. That illusion has been dying for years. Tonight, it took another body blow. We now live in a world where major powers are openly sharing advanced weapons systems across borders, where regional alliances are forming on the basis of fear rather than friendship, and where the line between peace and war is drawn with interceptor trajectories rather than treaties. For democracy itself, there is a quieter warning. When events of this size pass through the news cycle in a single afternoon and the public absorbs them between memes and sports highlights, something is broken in the connection between citizens and the decisions made in their name. A free society cannot consent to choices it does not understand. Tonight's announcement deserves hearings, debates, long conversations at kitchen tables. Instead, it will probably be old news by the weekend. That is its own kind of risk. Picture it again, one last time. A long stretch of desert sky over the Gulf, the kind of dark blue that turns almost violet just before dawn. Somewhere out there, a radar dish is turning. Somewhere out there, a battery is on standby, its crew in Israeli uniforms, its barrels pointed up. Somewhere out there, an Emirati family is asleep, trusting that the people watching their sky tonight are good at their jobs. 100 miles in one direction, Iranian planners are studying maps and recalculating. 1,000 miles in another, Israeli families are watching the news and trying to figure out what this means for their sons and daughters in uniform. Half a world away in Washington, the official spokespeople are smoothing the edges of the story, while the private rooms are bracing for whatever comes next. History does not move in straight lines, it moves in moments. Moments most people do not notice while they are happening. The Berlin Wall did not crack at a press conference, but a press conference was the moment that broke the dam. The Soviet Union did not collapse the day a flag came down, but the flag was the image that ended the era. Today, in a press briefing about batteries and personnel, another era ended quietly. The old Middle East, built on the rejection of Israel as the unifying glue of Arab politics, is gone. The new one is being welded together under fire with American supervision, Israeli technology, and Emirati nerve. Whether that new structure stands or shatters will depend on choices made over the next weeks and months in rooms most of us will never see. But you saw the moment, you heard the sentence. You felt the shift, even if no one in your feed is talking about it the way they should. This story is not over. The next move belongs to Iran. The move after that belongs to whichever side blinks first. And somewhere, a decision is already being drafted that none of us will hear about until it is too late to argue with it. So stay close, stay sharp, stay skeptical of anyone who tells you this is just another headline, because tonight, somewhere over the Gulf, the sky has a new set of guardians, and the rules of the region they protect have already changed. The cameras will move on. The world will not.